So I have friends who are of different races and different sexual orientations and identities. I have friends who are of different faith traditions, different sorts of Christians, Buddhists, Jews, Muslims, atheists. I even have friends who are pagans. I have friends who are of different political parties. I have friends who own guns and friends who hate guns. And here's the thing. I can have all those different friends because I'm convinced of two things. First, of my own imperfection, and also of the imperfection of all other people. And second, that it's not my place to offer advice or opinions to people who haven't asked me for them. This doesn't mean that I don't have opinions and advice galore on all kinds of subjects. It means that I've learned over many decades to keep my mouth shut unless it's my place to speak. If I'm not talking, I can actually learn things too. And I've learned to mind my own business unless it's my place to act. When is it my place to speak? When is it my place to act? That's a matter for discernment and wisdom, I suppose, for any of us. For me, I'm called to proclaim the gospel from the pulpit, and that involves having a point of view on things that are going on in the world. The gospel isn't neutral. Jesus is an advocate for the poor, the oppressed, the sick, the saddened, those who are on the outside, prisoners, the hungry, and all those who are searching for salvation, searching for meaning and purpose in life. So I believe that I am called to speak from the pulpit to those folks and to act in my ministry to work with them to better their lot in life. And I believe that I and other clergy are called to encourage you to speak and act because you too are called. But as I've said before, Christian apostleship, the idea that we are sent into life with a purpose, also has guidelines. We're not called to fix people because we think they're broken. They might very well be broken, but it's not our job to fix them. It's our calling to stand for God and all that God values, and to stand against evil and injustice. And how to do that is a process that's built on relationship building. I've shared with you before my belief that most efforts we see at spreading the good news, or as we used to call it, or still call it, evangelism, that they're just not effective. And actually, in point of fact, they're often counterproductive. If I stand on a street corner or I'm on cable news and I preach at people, the chances are I will have zero positive impact and probably turn a lot of people against Christians, or at least against me and the others who are standing there pontificating. That's because I have no relationship and no credibility with those people I meet on the street or with those people who are out there in the television audience. The same goes for knocking on doors and handing out pamphlets and any other efforts that try to convince people that the way I think about things is right and the way they think about things is wrong. Jesus said in today's gospel when he was preaching to a crowd, "To what will I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to one another, 'We played the flute for you, and you didn't dance. We wailed, and you didn't mourn.'" And what this means is precisely what I've been getting at. It speaks to a person's or a church's immaturity for it to complain about the world not dancing to our tune or being concerned about what we're upset about when we're essentially performing or complaining to strangers. It's not that we don't have a public role in society. It's that how we participate in public life is tone deaf and sometimes even whiny. There are thousands, even millions of people sitting in the marketplaces and calling to one another. Cable news does it, political parties and politicians do it, experts of all kinds do it, religious leaders do it, groups and individuals advocating their perspective on issues do it, and we're all free to do it, to go out into the marketplace, into the public realm and speak our minds. Jesus is simply saying that to do so without considering how to do it and why to do it and where and when to do it is immature and self-defeating. The other day on Facebook, I saw a former parishioner of mine from many years ago had reposted one of those little gems of folk wisdom and virtue, as so many of us do. You know the ones I'm talking about. 9 out of 10 people won't post this picture of an American flag. Share this if you're that one. In this case, she posted, share this if you're one of those rare people that thinks that prayer should be back in schools. And on the surface of it, if you're a Christian, that sounds like a great idea. Perhaps. But think about this. Will it be a Baptist prayer, a congregational prayer, a Catholic or Episcopalian or Hindu or Buddhist or a Muslim prayer? What about those pagans I mentioned? What about the atheists? It's not just that people will be offended that there is prayer in schools. It's that maybe half the kids will do it without thinking much of it, and the other half will do it and resent it because they don't believe in the tradition the prayer is from, or they just don't believe. And then the people who instituted it will do just what Jesus talked about. They'll act like children and complain that they played the flute and the kids didn't dance. They wailed about the lack of prayers and nobody mourned their absence. But the real issue is this. Trying to make people do something they don't want to do is a recipe for failure. And I, as a leader, have no interest in complaining about the fact that other people don't want to do what I want to do. I have a great deal of interest and passion around finding new and deeper friendships with different sorts of people, finding out what we have in common, where our interests are aligned, and acting based on that commonality. That's how leaders and movements succeed, at least truly empowering leaders and movements. They don't coerce, they don't force, they don't try to act as if they're the only ones with answers. They discern their shared principles among their following, learn about their differences, learn their areas of shared interest, and then act effectively in unity with their neighbors. That's how churches succeed, and that's also how democracies succeed. When Jesus mentions John the Baptist in the gospel, how he came proclaiming a message of renewal in preparation for Jesus himself, he says that many people dismissed John because of his strict religious practices. And then he goes on to say that then, when he himself came on the scene, people dismissed him. People dismissed Jesus because he wasn't as strict in his religious practices. In other words, we won't win people over if all we're trying to do is impress them with our appearance. People who are looking to dismiss us will find reasons to do so, and they won't even necessarily be consistent. We might be too strict one day and too lax the next. Yet wisdom, says Jesus, is vindicated by her deeds. It is what we do and the effect that it has in the world that demonstrates to the world that we are mature, wise, and able to deliver on what the gospel promises. Well, how do we know we're headed in the right direction, thinking the right thoughts, taking the right actions? Many years ago, when I was discouraged and unsure about the direction of my life, I read a passage from the gospel that began my conversion back to faith. It was these words that began to shift me out of atheism into faith and out of cynicism into love. And it was that quote from Jesus that we heard today. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And I didn't know immediately all that those words meant, but they moved me. How do I find rest in Jesus? I wondered. I was tired enough that I wanted rest, tired enough that I was even willing to try to find it in Jesus, whom I didn't really believe in. I wanted to lay down my burdens, anger, stress, wrong-headed living, contempt for those who were different than me. What did Jesus mean? I wondered. when he asked me to take his yoke upon me and learn from him. You all know, as I did, that a yoke is a device that allows draft animals, working animals, to work together in the same direction. It's a kind of harness that allows them to concentrate their efforts and pull together. It adds to their strength. And at first I had this vision when I read that passage that Jesus was sitting up on a wagon or behind a plow and telling me and everybody else that was yoked together where to pull. But then I realized that no, instead that he was wearing the yoke beside me and helping me in my work. But not really my work, his work, because it's his yoke. It's not that I wasn't wearing a yoke before. It's just that before I was always straining by myself and falling to my knees from exhaustion trying to accomplish what I wanted to do, or straining beside people who were working for a purpose that didn't invite my greatest strength because I didn't want to be doing the work they were doing. Of all the people I've met in my life, it has only been Jesus and his fellow workers in the church who have asked me to share their efforts with gentle words and humility. And those were the words I could hear and respond to. That's what brought me to this place at this time in order to face the challenges that our church does and our community and world does. And as hard as our work is inside our church as well as outside in the marketplace, in the community we live in, I find my soul is more at rest and the labor has meaning precisely because I'm yoked together with Jesus and all of you. That is what it means to be a Christian. Not to play the flute and hope that the world likes the tune and dances, to place our head and shoulders in the yoke of Jesus and work for his purpose, and show the world what can be done when Jesus and his servants get down to their labors. There will always be those who work against God's purpose. There will always be those who won't agree with what Jesus teaches. But we have to stop being our own worst enemy. People around us will see the wisdom of our faith, even if they disagree with us, when they see that Jesus and his servants get results and change lives for the better. And that we do it not by lording it over others and telling them what's wrong with them, but rather through humility, gentleness, love, and doing the very things that we preach to others.